World War I was raging across Europe on May 1st, 1915. The Western Front had become a stalemate, and the landings at Gallipoli had been a disaster for the British the past week. Germany had declared the waters around Britain as a war zone in retaliation for the naval blockade on Germany. The German embassy in Washington, D.C. wrote a notice to be printed in the papers, warning travelers intending to make the crossing from America to Britain. It was printed on April 30th, 1915, the day before the RMS Lusitania was to set sail from New York to Liverpool, England. It read, "Notice: travelers intending to embark on the Atlantic voyage are reminded that a state of war exists between Germany and her allies and Great Britain and her allies. That the zone of war includes the waters adjacent to the British Isles. That in accordance with formal notice given by Imperial German government, vessels flying the flag of Great Britain or any of her allies are liable to destruction in those waters, and that travelers sailing in the war zone on the ships of Great Britain or her allies do so at their own risk. Imperial German Embassy, Washington, D.C., April 22, 1915. Despite this warning, the British luxury liner RMS Lusitania intended to make the crossing. Her captain was William Thomas Turner. He began a life at sea when he was just 8 years old, on the Grasmere, which hit a rock and sank off the coast of Ireland in 1863. He had to swim to shore, but he survived. Captain Turner told the press that the Lusitania was too fast for any submarine to catch her, and that the talk of torpedoes had been the greatest joke that he had ever heard in many days. Charles P. Sumner, Cunard's spokesperson, told the press, "The fact is that the Lusitania is the safest boat on the sea. She's too fast for any submarine." The Lusitania could hold 552 first-class passengers, 460 second-class, 1,186 third-class, and 850 crew. She set sail on May 1st, 1915. There were 1,960 people on board, 290 first-class, 601 second-class, 373 third-class, 3 stowaways, and 693 crew. First class was at half capacity, and second class had been overbooked, so some of the second class passengers were placed in first class cabins. Third class was well under the maximum capacity, but this was normal for an eastbound crossing. Most of the occupants in third class were British citizens traveling home because of the war. As a precaution, the Lusitania's funnels were painted dark, and she was ordered not to fly a flag in the war zone. On April 30th, the German U-boat U-20 left Borkum and headed for the North Sea. It was commanded by Walter Schweigger. The U-boat then headed around Scotland and Ireland, then headed down the western coast to the southern coast of Ireland to patrol the waters for targets. After the Lusitania left New York, 3 stowaways were found. They were 3 German-speaking men. They were found hiding in the portside pantry. Detective Inspector William Pierpoint questioned the men, but they refused to answer any questions. Tensions were obviously high at this point during the war, so the men were to be locked away until the Lusitania reached Liverpool. Then they would be interrogated. The Lusitania could travel at a top speed of around 25 knots, but due to cost cutting for the war effort, Boiler Room 4 was shut down to conserve coal and crew costs. This slowed her speed from 25 to 21 knots, but she was still one of the fastest passenger liners left in operation. Events on the Lusitania went on as normal. They were still out of the war zone. The crew practiced lifeboat drills. The passengers dined in style in the grand dining room. The men relaxed in the smoking room, and women gossiped on deck. They traveled on the electric elevator, and relaxed in the veranda cafe. Most on board felt safe. The Lusitania was state-of-the-art with 34 watertight compartments that could be controlled from the bridge by using hydraulics. She also carried 48 lifeboats, enough for everybody on board. The Lusitania crept closer and closer to her final destination, with all 1,960 people on board, oblivious to the horrors that they would soon face. On May 5th, the wooden schooner Earl of Latham, with 5 crew, was carrying cargo from Limerick, Ireland to Liverpool, England. She had sailed down the west coast of Ireland and then below southern Ireland when the Earl of Latham was stopped by the submarine U-20 off Old Head of Kinsale early in the morning on May 5th, 1915. The commander of the U-boat, Walter Schweiger, ordered the crew to bring him their papers. He then ordered the 5 crew members to abandon ship. They boarded their lifeboat and headed for shore. The crew of the U-20 then fired on the Earl of Latham, and she quickly sank to the bottom of the sea floor. On May 5th, the Royal Navy sent a warning message out to all ships. It stated, "Submarines active off south coast of Ireland." At midnight, they added the additional message, "Submarine off Fastnet." On May 6th, the neutral cargo ship Cayo Romano had arrived close to Fastnet Rock and Lighthouse. They were from Cuba and flew a neutral flag. The submarine U-20 fired a torpedo at the ship, but it barely missed. On the morning of May 6th, the SS Candidate was sailing from Great Britain to the West Indies, when off the coast of Ireland, the U-20 shelled the funnel and the top of the ship. Some of the crew tried to abandon ship against captain's orders. The captain steered the ship away from the U-boat, but another shell hit the bridge. They stopped and abandoned ship. The U-20 allowed the crew to flee in their lifeboats. They then fired a torpedo into the ship. When this failed, the U-boat fired shells at the waterline until the Candidate sank, stern first. The crew tried to make it to a nearby Navy trawler, which turned and fled the U-boat, leaving the men stranded in their lifeboats. Luckily, the Lord Allendale picked up the men at 3 p.m. The U-20 then tried to attack the White Star liner Arabic, but the liner was too fast for the submarine, which could travel at 15 knots at the surface and around 9 knots underwater. Also on May 6 at around 1:45, the U-20 spotted the British ship SS Centurion. The ship's name had been painted over, and it didn't fly a flag. The U-20 hit the Centurion with a torpedo, waited for the crew to abandon ship. After an hour, the U-20 rose to the surface and fired another torpedo at the bow. The Centurion then sank to the bottom of the sea. Even with all these encounters with the U-20, the Navy at Queenstown was still not aware, so no messages about the sinkings were sent out that night. There were only warnings about submarines being spotted around the south coast of Ireland, as well as these instructions. Avoid headlands, pass harbors at full speed, steer a mid-channel course. By 5 a.m. on May 7th, the Lusitania was 120 miles from the coast of Ireland. She hit thick fog at around 6 a.m. Captain Turner ordered the ship to reduce its speed due to the foggy conditions. More lookouts were also added. The lifeboats were also swung out over the decks, so they were ready to be launched quickly in the event of an emergency. The Navy had advised all ships to use zigzagging patterns to make it harder for submarines to calculate a torpedo's trajectory, but Captain Turner did not listen to this warning. The foghorn was also sounded. Some passengers were upset at this, thinking that the ship was giving away its position to any enemy submarines in the area. But they made it through the fog, and by 10 a.m. the sun was shining. The Lusitania received a warning at around noon. U-boats active in southern part of Irish Channel, last heard 20 miles south of Conenberg Light. At 1 o'clock another warning was received. Submarine 5 miles south of Cape Clear, proceeding west when sighted at 10 a.m. Captain Turner was past this location already, so this information gave him a false sense of security. Turner believed that being closer to the coast reduced a chance of a U-boat attack, since submarine crews would be worried about being spotted by observers or Navy patrols. The U-20 had actually decided to head back to base that morning on the 7th. They were low on fuel, supplies, and torpedoes. That morning, the Juno was returning to Queenstown, Ireland. She was considered very vulnerable to U-boats by the Admiralty. The Juno was traveling at 16 knots and zigzagging after receiving warnings about the U-boats. The U-20 spotted and tried to go after the Juno, but due to her speed and maneuvering, the U-20 failed to attack. Lusitania's passengers gathered on deck as Ireland came into view. At 1:40 p.m., the Lusitania reached the old head of Kinsale. Little did they know, the submarine U-20 had spotted the luxury cruise liner about 20 minutes prior. The U-20 submerged to periscope depth, and they began traveling at 9 knots to try and get closer to the massive ship. The Lusitania changed course. The U-20 thought they had lost their chance, but the Lusitania again changed course, this time into a position perfect for the U-20 to make an attack. Commander Schweiger ordered one gyroscopic torpedo to be fired. At a depth of 3 meters, it would reach the Lusitania in just under a minute. Seaman Leslie Morton was stationed at the bow of the Lusitania. He spotted the foam from the torpedo racing towards the ship. He thought that he had seen 2 torpedoes and yelled into a megaphone, "Torpedoes coming on the starboard side!" Seaman Thomas Quinn in the crow's nest also yelled, "Torpedo, starboard side, sir!" Commander Schweiger on the U-20 wrote what he saw next. Torpedo hit starboard side, right behind the bridge. An unusually heavy detonation takes place, with a very strong explosive cloud. The explosion of the torpedo must have been followed by a second one, boiler or coal or powder. The ship stops immediately and heels over to starboard very quickly, immersing simultaneously at the bow. The name Lusitania becomes visible in golden letters. Witnesses stated that a jet of water from the impact site sent water and debris into the air that knocked Lifeboat 5 off of its davits. There was a second explosion just after the torpedo hit. The cause of the second explosion was never explained. There is still much debate and speculation over the cause of it. Some of the reasons for the explosion could have been a coal dust explosion, since the coal bunkers were located near the point of impact. The coal bunkers were mostly empty besides coal dust on the bottom of the bunker. The torpedo also could have ruptured steam pipes or damaged one of the ship's boilers, causing a boiler explosion. But some of the crew that were stationed by the boilers survived and did not believe that this was the cause of the second explosion. It is also said that the Lusitania was transporting US-made weapons and ammunition, including aluminum powder, 4,200 cases of rifle cartridges, and 1,250 cases of shrapnel shells and fuses. Some believe that this was the cause of the second explosion. Whatever the case, the Lusitania began taking on water, a large amount of water. Captain Turner ordered Quartermaster Hugh Johnson to turn Lusitania towards Ireland in an attempt to beach the ship. But the ship was not responding like it should. It overturned. Captain Turner ordered the engines to be reversed to stop the ship, but the ship was damaged and not responding. The steam pressure was also dropping rapidly. The ship started listing quickly. Wireless operators Robert Leith and Donald McCormick sent an SOS signal, which was received, but unfortunately it would take the smaller ships that would be responding around 2 hours to reach the sinking liner. The power failed on the ship, and a passenger reported that one of the elevators was stuck and passengers were trapped inside. Since the Lusitania's engines were down, the ship could not be stopped. Captain Turner had to wait for the ship to stop by itself before the lifeboats could begin lowering. Some of the crew members who were supposed to lower the lifeboats were trapped in the forward cargo area. This caused even more problems. The ship was listing at 15 degrees to starboard when the order was given to abandon ship. The Lusitania was sinking fast. Unfortunately, when the Lusitania was unable to stop, water had been forced into the opening made by the torpedo and second explosion. The Lusitania's forecastle was soon underwater. This bad list made it difficult to launch the lifeboats. On the starboard side, the boats hung out too far. A deck chair had to be used so the passengers could reach the lifeboats. On the port side, when lowering the lifeboats, the rivets on the ship began dragging on the side of the lifeboats, causing damage to them. Some of the lifeboats flipped over, sending the passengers into the water. Only 6 lifeboats were successfully launched. Some of the collapsible lifeboats floated away. Many clambered on top to stay out of the frigid water. On U-20, Schwager looked through the periscope. He could see all the destruction that he had caused. At 2:25, just 15 minutes after he ordered the torpedo fired, the U-20 steamed off away from the chaos. Captain Turner ordered Quartermaster Johnson to save himself. He tried to stay on the ship as long as he could, but he was washed overboard. Detective Inspector Pierpoint could not make it to the 3 German men he had locked away in the ship. The men drowned with no way to escape. Pierpoint was washed over right as the ship disappeared below the waves. He was sucked into a whirlpool towards one of the massive funnels as the ship sank, but an explosion pushed him to safety. But many were sucked into the funnels as the ship sank. Captain Turner was near the bridge when a wave washed him into the sea. He found a chair and held on to it. The Lusitania had traveled 2 miles from the site where she was torpedoed. The bow went under first, then the stern was lifted into the air. She then went under. The rigging was last to go under. The Lusitania sank in just 18 minutes. The water was 52 degrees Fahrenheit. In water that cold, death can occur between 1 and 6 hours. Many died who went into the water that day, as well as others who were trapped inside the ship. Captain Turner fell unconscious, but was pulled to safety. He survived. 767 passengers and crew were rescued. The death toll was 1,197 people out of the 1,960 people on board. This included 128 Americans. The Cunard Line offered a reward for any bodies recovered. Only 289 were found. Germany was held responsible for the crime of willful and wholesale murder. Captain Turner and Cunard were not held responsible for the sinking. The sinking of the Lusitania did not bring America into the war, but it did turn public opinion against Germany. But later on, it was a factor in America's decision to join the war. I want to thank y'all for watching this, folks. I hope you enjoyed this one, and we will see you on the next. Peace.